All right, so are you ready to really dive deep into Stephen King?
Let's do it.
Okay, so today we're taking on Desperation.
Ooh, good one.
Pretty intense read.
Yeah.
Um, and we're going to be using excerpts from the book, just to kind of set the stage and really get into some of the themes. And it's basically about what happens when a malevolent force like takes over a place.
Yeah.
And it's a place that seems totally normal, right?
That's what's always so scary about Stephen King. He takes us to these really normal, isolated, forgotten parts of America, and then he's just like, boom, there's this darkness under the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And this time that place is Desperation, Nevada.
Never been.
So have you ever been to a near ghost town?
I have.
Okay.
It's creepy.
Yeah, it's kind of unsettling, right?
Yeah.
Desolate. It used to be a mining town, and you can kind of feel that history's left its mark.
Yeah, totally.
Both on the landscape and the people. And of course, no Stephen King book would be complete without this extra creepy location.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And in Desperation, that is the China Pit.
Interesting name.
Yeah, it's an abandoned mine just outside of town, and everyone says it's haunted.
Oh, so right off the bat, we've got this isolation. The town is holding its breath, and then there's this creepy mine.
Right. It's the perfect setup for a horror story. And speaking of characters, right, one of the things King does so well is he introduces these really interesting people.
Right away.
Yeah, right away. And you've got this the race group, they're all stranded in desperation for different reasons. So you have Peter and Mary Jackson, a young couple just on a road trip looking for adventure. You've got Johnny Marinville.
I love Johnny Marinville.
Oh yeah, he's great. He's this once famous writer, but he's battling all these personal demons.
Yeah, classic King character.
Right. And then there's David Carver. He's only 11 years old, but he has this really deep connection to God.
Yeah.
And, you kind of get the sense right away that King put all these different people together on purpose.
Yeah.
To see how they react to the same terrifying situation.
Yeah, and they all come in with these different beliefs, their backgrounds are totally different. And it's almost like he's saying, okay, when things hit the fan, let's see what humanity is made of.
Exactly. It's this ultimate test of the human spirit. And the thing that's testing them, it's seriously sinister.
Yeah.
So we're introduced to Colleen Trajan pretty early on. He's the town deputy.
Okay.
And at first he just seems like this rogue cop.
Yeah.
But there's something way darker going on. It's looking into his eyes and you just know something's not right.
Chills.
Yeah. So it turns out Trajan is basically controlled by this entity called Talk. He's just a vessel.
Hold on, a vessel? What do you mean?
Well, Talk's this ancient, evil being. And it needs to keep jumping from one host to another. But when it does, it just leaves this trail of death and destruction.
So that's Trajan, just Talk's puppet.
Yeah, exactly. And Talk's really smart about it too. It doesn't just use brute force. It plays on people's fears,
right.
Twists how they see things, and its ultimate goal.
Right,
it wants to totally crush people's faith in God.
It's so creepy.
I know, right? It's not just about surviving physically. It's this battle for your soul. Imagine your core beliefs, the things that give you hope, just totally destroyed.
That's terrifying.
Right. That's the core of the horror here. And King doesn't hold back on the details either. Things get really dark really fast.
So what happens? What does Trajan do?
Oh, he goes on this rampage, abductions, gruesome murders. He even displays the bodies as warnings.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And to make things even worse, King throws in all these creepy animal encounters. Coyotes and this mountain lion that's stalking the town.
Yeah. It's nature itself is turning against them.
Exactly. It just adds to this whole feeling of dread. But even in the middle of all this, there's David Carver.
The 11-year-old.
Yeah, he's got this unshakable faith in God, And it's his belief is this shield against Talk's influence.
So his faith is actually protecting him.
Yeah, and it's not just passive faith. It's an active force. He prays for his friend Brian, who's in a coma, and Brian makes this miraculous recovery.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's when things get really interesting because Talk sees David's faith as a threat, a real threat.
So it's this ancient evil feeding off fear, right? And then you have this kid whose face is so strong, it's messing up Talk's plans.
Exactly. How often do you see that in a horror novel?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what would happen if we all had that kind of faith.
That is a good question.
Right. So it's this battle between good and evil is playing out.
Yeah.
And then you've got Johnny Marinville, the writer, who's kind of the opposite of David.
He's not religious.
No, he's super cynical. Like, he's lost his faith. He's struggling with his career, his life, everything. And even though he's seeing all this crazy stuff happening, he jokes about it.
So he's using humor to deal with it.
Yeah. And then there's Steve Ames. He's Marinville's roadie. And they pick up this hitchhiker named Cynthia Smith.
Okay.
And they get caught up in all this chaos, too. But they're not really thinking about, like, the spiritual stuff, you know?
Yeah.
They're just focused on surviving.
Yeah.
Because they represent that side of humanity that just kicks into survival mode when things get tough. Like, they see danger, they know they got to act, and they do what they got to do to protect themselves.
So it's like you've got all these different reactions to the same situation. You've got David with his faith, Marinville with his cynicism, and then Steve and Cynthia just trying to make it through.
Exactly. And they're all trapped in this town, hunted by something they don't understand, and they're forced to confront, like, their deepest beliefs, their own limitations. And it's all just, like, building and building this incredible tension.
I can only imagine what happens next.
It gets even wilder, trust me.
So they're stuck in this nightmare, right? But what's interesting is, like, the more time they spend in desperation, the more they figure out just how bad the situation is.
Yeah, at first they think Intriguing is just this, like, crazy cop.
Right.
But then, like, the pieces start falling into place,
Yeah.
you know, and they realize, uh-oh, he's not the real problem.
It's just a puppet.
Exactly.
Like a scary, creepy puppet.
Yeah, and that's when it hits them. They're dealing with something way older, way more evil than they ever imagined.
Talk.
And that's when I think things get really interesting, because you start to see how this whole situation, like, messes with their beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, it's like their whole worldview is just crumbling around them.
It's got to be hard to hold on to anything you believe in when you're facing something like that.
Right. Like, how do you make sense of any of it?
Yeah.
And I think Johnny Marinville is a great example of this. Yeah. Remember, he's, like, super cynical, lost his faith, doesn't really believe in anything anymore. But as all this crazy stuff goes down, you can almost see him start to change.
He starts to believe.
Well, there's this one scene I keep thinking about. Trajan kills the town's safety officer, just totally brutal, and they find the body.
Yeah.
And Marinville makes this comment about how David is so strong, but, like, the way he says it,
Yeah.
you can tell he's kind of in awe.
He sees something more than just a kid.
Yeah, like, he's starting to think maybe there's more to this whole faith thing than he thought. Like, the veil's lifting a little bit, you know?
That's a really good point.
And then there's Mary, you know?
Yeah.
Her story just, like, blew me away.
What about Mary?
She goes through this incredible transformation. I mean, think about it. She starts out terrified, right? Which makes sense. The whole town is being terrorized.
Totally.
But then Trajan, like, kills her husband. And it's like the switch flips inside her. And suddenly, she's not afraid anymore.
Wow, really?
She picks up the shotgun. It's empty, but she still faces Trajan down.
She's not backing down.
No way. She knows she's probably going to die, but she stands her ground. I mean, how strong is that?
That's a powerful scene. I mean, you don't always see female characters like that in horror, you know? Usually they're the victims.
You're right. But Mary, she turns into this force. It's amazing. And then the story takes us to the China Pit.
The mine.
The mine. It's not just a creepy abandoned place, though. It's like this battleground, you know, where good and evil are going to, like, clash.
It's been talked about since the beginning.
Right. And it's got all this history, these dark secrets buried deep underground. And you get the feeling the mine itself is like another character.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like, it's seen so much, you know.
So how do they end up there?
David, he starts having these visions. And they lead everyone to the China Pit.
Oh, wow.
And they think, okay, this is it. This is where we're going to defeat Tak. But what they find down there, it's not just the answer they're looking for. It's this whole other layer of horror.
What do you mean?
They find out about these Chinese laborers who died in the mine, like way back when. They got trapped when a shaft collapsed.
Oh, my God.
And it's just this, like, terrible story about suffering, about how easily these things can get forgotten, you know? And it's like this reminder that darkness can hide anywhere.
Even in a forgotten mine shaft.
Exactly. And it's inside that mine where they face the biggest test. It's the final showdown with Taka. And everyone has to make a choice. It's like a life or death decision.
They're pushed to their limit.
Absolutely. They're exhausted. They're scared. The tension is just, like, suffocating. David, his faith is shaken for the first time. Mary, her strength is pushed further than ever before. And even Johnny Marinville, he has to confront the darkness inside himself.
He has to choose a side.
Yeah. And then there's this scene that's just, like, heart-wrenching. David, he finds his mom, but she's not herself. She's become one of Talk's hosts.
Oh,
She's
no.
like this twisted version of the woman he loves. And she tries to tempt him, promises him power if he'll just give up on God, join Talk. You can feel how torn he is.
Torn between his mom and his faith.
Yeah. And in that moment, when it feels like he's going to break, that's when his faith shines the brightest.
Huh.
He refuses to give in. He chooses God. But the thing is, it's not David, the kid with all this faith, who defeats Talk in the end.
Wait, really?
It's Johnny Marinville.
The cynic.
The cynic. He sacrifices himself to destroy Talk.
Wow. I did not see that coming.
Right. It makes you think about, what does it really mean to be a hero?
It's not always the person you expect. And sometimes it's the people who have lost the most, who have the most to give.
Exactly. And so the survivors, they make it out of desperation. They're alive, but they're changed forever.
They've seen too much to ever be the same.
Right. They've faced their fears. They've seen the worst of humanity, but also the best. And they're left with these questions about good and evil, about faith, about what it means to be human.
Questions that don't have easy answers.
Nope. And I think that's part of what makes Desperation so powerful. They make it out, They survive desperation.
But yeah, you said it. They're changed.
Forever, right. I mean, how could they not be?
It's like they went through this, intense fire and came out the other side.
Yeah, and they're marked by it for sure. But they're also, stronger.
Yeah, I think that's part of what King's getting at, right? It's not just about the horror. It's about how people deal with it, how they find the strength to keep going.
Exactly. And that's why this story just sticks with you. It's not just a fun, spooky read. It's it makes you think.
It challenges you, right? What would I do if I was in that situation? Would I have that kind of faith like David? Could I be as brave as Mary?
Right. Or would you be like Johnny? Struggling with everything, but then in the end, finding this incredible strength.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so brilliant about how King writes these characters. They feel real, they could be people you know.
Totally. It's not just David, Mary, and Johnny either, right?
Yeah.
Even Steve and Cynthia, they don't get as much attention, but they're so important.
What do you mean?
Well, they're not super spiritual or anything. They're just normal people who get caught up in this crazy situation.
Yeah.
But they show so much loyalty, so much selflessness.
They risk their lives to help others.
Yeah, over and over again. And it shows that you don't have to be some kind of saint to be a hero, Sometimes it's just about doing the right thing, even when you're terrified.
Even when it seems impossible.
Exactly. And then there's the setting itself, right? The desert. It's so bleak, so unforgiving.
It adds to the whole atmosphere of the book.
Totally. It's this character in itself. Desperation is so isolated, it's the rules of the world don't even apply there. It's anything can happen. I think that's why it's so effective.
It's like a nightmare come to life.
Right. And it gets under your skin. You start to think about what's hiding in the shadows of the places I know? What kind of darkness is lurking just beneath the surface?
It makes you appreciate the ordinary, maybe we take for granted how safe and normal things are most of the time.
Yeah, until something like Talk comes along and just rips it all away.
Okay.
But even then, even in the face of that kind of evil, King shows us that there's still hope. There's still good in people.
There's that strength inside us waiting to be tapped into.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this book so powerful, so important, It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, we can find the light within ourselves.
We can find the strength to overcome.
So yeah, if you haven't read Desperation, I definitely recommend it. It's scary, it's intense, but it's also incredibly moving. And for those of you who have read it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stayed with you? What challenged you? Did it change how you see the world?
And did it give you hope? Because even though it's a horror story, I think that's what King wants us to take away from it. That even in the face of true evil, there's still hope. There's still good in the world.
Absolutely. There's still that spark inside each of us, waiting to be ignited. So keep searching for it, keep fighting for it, and most importantly, keep that spark alive. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.